That's why we are having a
Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to the council briefing of the 7th of March 2023. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're meeting on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past and present. In terms of apologies and members on leave of absence, we haven't received any apologies this evening. Okay, so we're accepting apologies then from Councillor Suzanne Warner due to medical reasons, and then we will move straight to public question time and receiving of public statements. So welcome members of the community to our meeting. For those who may not have been here on another occasion, we just ask that if you do wish to speak to an item that you just come up to the microphone. There's no set order. We just ask that you state your name, the suburb that you live in and or work in if it's related to your role as an employment in the City of Vincent, and that you talk to let us know the number that you're talking to this evening. And if you can't pick it out, I can help you with that. So question time is open. Whoever would like to come forward first, please come up to the microphone. Thank you, John.
I hope I've got the right order here. I'd like to speak on item 8.4. That was a motion that was put at the electors meeting, motion 4.14. Is this the correct time?
Yes, John, that's right. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's get my glasses. I put forward at the electors meeting that a new conservation plan be commissioned for Hyde Park. And the council, I notice, has supported my motion. So thank you very, very much for that. But I just want to talk about why a conservation plan is very, very important as such. It was done in 2003 as a result of Hyde Park going onto the State Register for Heritage Places in 1998, 18 years ago. And it meant that this council could actually apply for heritage funding. And to my knowledge, it never has. So there's been a pool of money there for projects, documentation, and many other things as such. And a conservation plan is important, and it makes recommendations and guidelines contained within it for the purposes of retaining and conserving the cultural heritage significance of Hyde Park. Now, that's different to just your normal grassed areas, your public open spaces as such. And on page 149 of the conservation plan, it actually sets out 12 points of the cultural significance of Hyde Park. I just want to go to the very first one. And it says, the cultural significance of Hyde Park, a well-composed example of a Federation-era park that exhibits elements of the earlier Victorian garden-esque style, a style that has continued to be used in the landscaping of municipal parks well into the 20th century. So this is a very important aspect of it. It's got cultural significance because of that. And as I said, there's also other points which you can see in the conservation plan. I was one of the co-authors of that document, and I'm very disappointed in many aspects of how Hyde Park has actually been managed, from the horticultural side of it and other management policies. This document has not been used and consulted. That was the very purpose of why it was commissioned and why the former city of Vincent, town of Vincent, ratified it. And it's a managing tool that needs to be consulted. And that's a very important part of the conservation plan. Now, you have supported my motion to revisit that and possibly upgrade it as such. And when the new document is actually commissioned, and I assume it will be advertised and put out for interest, you will want people that have experience within that, i.e. the Heritage Council of WA, professional historical researchers, horticulturalists with heritage experience, heritage architects, arboriculturalists that have worked on heritage, had heritage experience. And you need to have input from other community groups like the WA branch of the Australian Garden History Society, your own local history centre, which is a font of information, and the WA Horticultural Council. So the document is very, very important, and there are major problems in the park now from diseases and pests, which is...
John, you have reached your 3 minutes, so could you just make your concluding comment, please?
Okay. So therefore, the purpose of the conservation plan is that it's used as a working document by the technical staff to guide how the park is managed and its cultural significance is maintained. And it comes through discussions with the author of the conservation plan and technical staff as such. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. And also just to correct myself, I had tabled your apologies, Councillor Warner, but I say you're attending online, so it's fantastic to see you. Thank you for joining us online this evening. Next speaker, please. Thank you, John.
Mari Slythe, 89 Carr Street, West Perth, and I wish to speak to the request we put at the AGM, which did get approval at the time or agreed, about creating a cul-de-sac in Strathcona Street to protect our local people from the, well, when Bunnings is finally built, how the impact is going to affect all of us in our streets and change how we live. And we believe that's going to be the case because of we already have further rat running through our precinct, the streets being Florence Street all the time, Carr Street, Strathcona Street, and they also use Hammond Street to get out when they're in a hurry. But this is going to get worse. And we do foresee if there's going to be business being conducted in Bunnings, how are these people going to get there? They're not going to go by main roads. They're going to find the shortest way they can get if they're coming from North Perth, east side, and or West Perth on the other side. They've got to get there. And so we really fear for our future, and this is serious. And it's on a daily basis. We notice how the numbers of traffic are increasing all the time, and they're getting faster. So 30 kilometres an hour is just a joke. I'm sorry, they don't observe that. There's no way, it's not safe. They're going to go as fast as they can to get through the streets they want to get through, including Strathcona Street. That's also supposed to be 30k. Carr Street is now, we watch them go past, be 60, sometimes up to 70, because they're going to get to the traffic lights to get where they've got to go. And it doesn't get less. And now we also have e-bikes zooming along with them as well on the roads. It's really interesting. So no one's been hit yet. But one of the reasons a decision that council made on this was we haven't had any accidents yet. That's sheer miracle, because I come out my front gate and I'm likely to get hit by an e-scooter because I can't see them until I step on the footpath. And it missed me by a whisker about 3 times so far. So anyhow, getting back to the speed limit, if Bunnings trucks do not go through our precinct, that's not proven it will or not yet, but if they don't, how are trucks that need timber from the timber yard at Bunnings going to get back to where they live, say in northeast Perth area? How are they going to do it? They're not going to go to the main roads. They're going to get as fast as they can. So that's still going to affect our streets. And we wonder why council is not doing speeding line tests across these streets, which will let us prove that what we're saying is true. And it just don't take what you get on paper or you believe might be right without coming and checking it for us. And once Bunnings is completed, council will have to provide residents with parking facilities, since there is bound to be an overflow into our local streets from Bunnings customers. At the onset of Bunnings takeover, council did state that adjoining local areas like Cleaver Precinct character area, which we're supposed to be, and that's being ruined by increased traffic already, would be looked after. You did tell us that in that initial Bunnings policy you put out. Admin's review statement of a number of crashes, well, as I just mentioned that, we haven't had them. No. So does that mean there's not going to be crashes? I'm not saying there will or won't, but that shouldn't be the decision that council makes, this decision on saying they're not going to let us have a cul-de-sac in Strathcona Street, because we believe that will stop the rat running. And that's why we're putting that to council tonight. I've discussed with a few neighbours the other day or just recently, and they will say, why isn't council helping us? So that's my comments.
Thanks, Mari. You've reached your 3 minutes.
Yes. And the other item I had to speak was
Mari,
the tree.
You have sort of cut yourself short there, because you've spoken for 3 minutes already, but you have provided us with your
You've got that.
words in advance, so we also have that in writing here, and
So
that's
can that be
covering off your
All right.
words in relation to the removal of the
The tree,
tree. So
the tree,
we've got
yep.
that in writing
Can that be
here.
decided on tonight as well?
No, this is the briefing. So
briefing.
yep, the
That's true,
council
that's right.
meeting next
Okay,
week
sure,
will
that's
be
right.
when we make
Okay.
the decision on the
Okay.
motions
That'll be
response.
Tuesday.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Murray. Next speaker, please.
Hello, it's Penny Hutchinson from 14 Florence Street. I'm here with at least 5 other residents and 6, including Mari Slythe, in relation to the same matter. There are big discussions going on the streets of Florence Street, Hammond Street, Carr Street and Strathcona Street. We're a small representation. We're all quite anxious about the rat running of cars that are already taking place down Florence, onto Carr and then through Strathcona. It would in fact inconvenience the residents living inside of that district to have the cul-de-sac, but we feel that it's an absolute necessity in advance of Bunnings being built, and that any anticipation of, you know, the necessity of an accident to happen prior to the justification for a cul-de-sac to be built is not a sufficient justification in anticipation of Bunnings being built and what's going to happen to the residents inside that small West Perth precinct. We are a small precinct, but we're active and the people are talking about it. We implore you to listen to us, please, and take care of us in relation to this huge Bunnings bombardment that's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Penny. I might just stop and ask a question, but you can answer later. But manager, so I'm looking at manager policy in place in terms of the transport study that is to be undertaken for the Pickle District local planning framework. Would that take into consideration the residential streets on the other side of Newcastle Street? Okay, so perhaps we could look into that because that might be relevant. Thank you. Next speaker, please. Oh, hello, you're already here. Go ahead.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Joshua Carmody from Planning Solutions in Perth, and I'm speaking to you on behalf of Mr. Peroni, who's sitting here, and Ms. Prestopino, who are the landowners of 107 Palmerston Street, which is the 4 strata dwellings, strata units to the southwest of the development, which you'll be looking at tonight under item 5.1. So Mr. Peroni and Ms. Prestopino are deeply concerned about the impact that this development is going to make and the substantial overshadowing that will be caused if it's approved. Now, when I say substantial, what I'm talking about is that 3 of the units on this strata complex will be overshadowed to an extent of greater than 70%, and 1 of them will be overshadowed up to 92%. Now, all these units, these 3 units, will experience overshadowing of the outdoor living areas and north-facing living rooms throughout most of the winter, throughout the winter. And we understand from Mr. Peroni that this includes the blocking of the daylight access to the bedroom, staircase, living rooms, and dining areas. So areas that's currently receive natural sunlight will require internal lighting to be on throughout the day. And this as a consequence, Mr. Peroni informs me that one of his tenants has already advised that he'll be looking to relocate if this development goes ahead. Now, the R codes are quite clear. Overshadowing above 50% is permissible when sole access to adjoining properties and the living areas of adjoining properties is protected. And that's not my words, it's the plain wording of the objectives, to protect solar access. And I think it's abundantly clear when you review the plans and the city's own assessment that solar access to the outdoor living areas has not been protected and will be very significantly overshadowed during winter. Now, the underlying assumption behind this proposal and the city's assessment seems to be that everyone's entitled to build a big house regardless of the size, shape and orientation of their lot. And regardless of whether this is a development that we'd like to see there, it doesn't change the fact that the only one who's being asked to compromise here is the residents of 107 Palmerston. And the history of this application suggests that it has perhaps been some expectation of compromise from the applicant based on the previous deferral and an expectation that impact on amenity will be reduced to acceptable levels. But to this point, and as the report states, the applicant is not willing to make any further changes. It should go without saying that you need to design your development to suit the property you have. And the applicant's desire to maximise development isn't our client's problem. All we ask council is that they either refuse this application on this grounds, or at the very least, to defer it again so that the applicant can achieve some meaningful compromise with the residents that would protect their solar access and amenity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joshua. Next speaker, please.
Hi. I'm Louise Schneider, 171 Harold Street, Mount Lawley. I'm speaking about petitions put in by a Harold Street Action Group, which I think is 6.1 on the agenda. Regarding the contents of the briefing agenda, we would like to ask the council to favourably consider and approve the suggested changes to resident parking. That is, implementation of resident parking on the south side of our street. Regarding the traffic management, we appreciate that Main Roads have already identified the intersections with Harold and Beaufort Streets as black spots, and funding is available this financial year to implement measures to mitigate adverse traffic events. But we remain concerned that even with the implementation of these measures, it will not address the traffic management concerns raised in our petition, with an anticipated increase in traffic volume associated with the imminent opening of the Chalice development, and the continued ability of traffic to use our portion of Harold Street as a rat run. We would appreciate council approve a traffic calming warrant check to assess if any other measures, such as our request of making our street one way, need to be implemented. It is our request that this warrant be instigated after the opening of the Chalice development. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Next speaker, please.
All right. Good evening, Mayor Cole and councillors. Peter Merger from Urbanistic Town Planning, speaking to agenda item 5.1 for 109 Palmerston Street in Perth.
Sorry, Peter, just a suburb that you wish to state, or you can do Urbanista's address if you like.
231 Boer Street in Perth.
Thank you.
Just around the corner from the subject site. I was recently engaged by the owners of the property to assist with the development application process, and after reviewing the background information, I advised my client to lodge an appeal in the State Administrative Tribunal. My advice was based on the time and uncertainty of the assessment process that has taken us to this point in time. By way of background, the application process formally commenced in December 2021, when the application was first reviewed by the city's design review panel. Prior to this, the plans were discussed in meetings with officers at the city. 13 months after first presenting to the DRP, the application is being presented back to council for the second time, in between which it has taken a further 3 design reviews, 2 rounds of public advertising, and several rounds of revisions and requests for information. We're asked if further amendments would be presented to address the neighbours' concerns in January, but we're told that if those plans were presented, that we would require another round of public advertising and review, which would extend the time that a report could be presented to council till about May or June of this year. Given the uncertainty that we've experienced up until this point in time, my advice was to lodge an appeal in the SAT, which I think is understandable, given that the process started in 2021. By June of this year, it would have taken the city more than 450 days to determine an application that the planning and development regulations allocate a timeframe of 90 days. Furthermore, we would have knocked up sort of all of 450 days, being no sure of where the application would actually be supported. In that context, the recent announcements made by the state to increase the power of the JDAP at the expense of local government seem to make sense. Unfortunately, it highlights an ongoing problem when dealing with applications at the city, the assessment process being blown out time after time with applications that involve group dwellings. I think the councillors can see the problem, and I hope the management is able to find solutions. Otherwise, the number of applications returned by SAP and the JDAP will increase, and this is not something that the community wants to see. I don't wish to offend anyone, particularly yourself, Mayor Cole, but I feel that tonight my comments had to be direct and clear in relation to the planning process.
I do
seeking
understand your
approval
point,
from-
Peter, but if you can keep to the specifics of this application, that would
Yeah.
be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm speaking to, I guess, why we lodged the deemed refusal. With respect to overshadowing, that is clearly a bit of a nonsense, given the fig tree overshadows the existing development and our own for more than I think the 60% that we propose as part of this application. We've shown that to the city. We can't move around that. The design is a good design. It is supported by the DRP. It has been articulated to allow sunlight.
So you've reached the end of your 3 minutes when you probably could have been speaking specifically, but anyway, you chose that path. So
No worries.
you might have to come back next week, or you could send us an email.
We will do. Thank you.
Okay,
Cheers.
thanks, Peter. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Ashley LaFontaine, North Perth. I'm addressing item 8.4 and specifically the motion 4.12. At the AGM, I proposed on behalf of my community that ratepayers within the previous Highgate East State Underground Power Project area be refunded or credited towards their rates next year. This motion was carried, but administration's response here does not support it on the reasoning that all funds that remain in the underground power reserve at the completion of the project will be able to be used to support other projects at the city, subject to a decision from council. I'd like to ask, firstly, how much money is the city expecting to accrue in the underground power reserve at the completion of the project? And secondly, given the cost of living pressures ratepayers are currently under, lifting rates should have been a last resort. Why was this funding model selected instead of the previous loan model, which charged interest only to those who chose to defer payment to cover their underground power? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Dudley Meyer Highgate. The first item is 8.4, the annual meeting of and the responses. So I'm disappointed but not surprised with the response about the suggestion about making it easier for residents to deal with e-waste. It's motion 416. It's unrealistic to suggest that people are going to drive all the way to Tamala Park or Balcatta or use the Verge valet service at $200 a pop to dispose of a computer screen, a laptop or some computer equipment. It's just unrealistic. And it's not about setting up your own recycling centre as suggested by the staff. It's about providing a big box somewhere that people can drop off stuff somewhere that's convenient, and just having a staff member with a ute take it somewhere to Osborne Park near the city's depot and deal with it. It's no big deal. The second item is the response to the suggestion about clarifying who can speak on behalf of the council. The response says that any non-DAP elected member can go to the DAP and speak as a council member representing the interests of the community, and I'm quoting them. And it's not about speaking, it's about purporting to speak on behalf of the city or council without the council first having taken a formal position. And as an example, the mayor recently spoke on the Bunnings proposal on behalf of the city without formally consulting the rest of council. She was against the proposal. So what happens if another councillor had gone along and said they were speaking on behalf of the council and they thought development was very good and it should be supported, particularly if the mayor hadn't been at that meeting? So, with regards to the commercial waste motion, there's a statement that the commercial rate in the dollar is 19% lower for commercial than residential. This either demonstrates a lack of understanding how rates work or is intended to incorrectly suggest that businesses have been treated favourably. The different rates in the dollar simply reflect the inconsistent changes to the relative GRVs about 3 years ago. It's like trying to imply that the rates in Claremont are cheaper than in Vincent because the rate in the dollar is 6.86 cents there, whereas Vincent's 25% higher at 8.5 cents in the dollar. The reality is that the average rate in Claremont is 2,370, Vincent is 1,720. So that argument is a furphy. The second item is 7.4, the mid-year review. So first of all, I note that the CEO's commitment at the budget with the 20.5 million capital works would be spent this year has been blown out of the water. Attachment, so what's the relevance to ratepayers. Attachment 5 shows that just under $1 million of ratepayers' money was not needed this year. There's also in the report acknowledgement about the $1 million mistake in the opening surplus, but there's no explanation, almost as if there's no real concern. So my questions are, how did the $1 million variance come about? And when were the staff first aware of it? And I'd be happy to get that in the briefing notes. There's also the fact that the $1 million surplus adjustment isn't transparently carried forward to the closing balance to reduce next year's rates. And I know all the counter arguments, but this is about transparency and not about resorting to sort of pea and thimble accounting that nobody can follow. There's also a recommendation to put $1.5 million in underground power reserve.
You have reached your 3 minutes, Dudley.
I'll finish the sentence then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Effectively obtaining a bridging finance for the project before you've even decided on a funding model. So it looks that it's far too early. The surplus should be carried forward until a decision has been made. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Marco Vittino. I'm a resident and owner at Orange Avenue, Perth, and director of a small architectural practice at Munger Street, Perth. I refer to agenda item 8.6, information bulletin, attachment 7, register of applications referred to the Metro Inner North Joint Development Assessment Panel. Item number 5, which is 139 to 141 Lake Street, Perth. Both my residence and place of work are in close proximity of the proposed development site, and I'm here representing a group of over 100 concerned local residents and users of the adjacent Stewart Reserve who collectively do not support the current revised proposal for 139-141 Lake Street. We have submitted our detailed reasons for not supporting the scheme in writing, but in summary, believe it is excessive in bulk and scale and compromised in quality, amenity, safety, and sustainability. I wish to ask 2 questions. Firstly, does the city think it's appropriate to recommend the approval of a scheme which is not compliant with or respectful of the long-term vision of the area and will result in overdevelopment of a site beyond what the city's own policies deem to be allowable and acceptable in this location? And secondly, would elected members be willing to undertake a site visit to consider our collective concerns? Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Next speaker, please. Anyone further? Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for your comments this evening and your questions. For those that have asked questions, we can come to those when we ask questions of administration on these items. So tonight isn't the decision-making meeting. That will be next Tuesday, and this is a forum for council members to seek further information, ask questions, flag amendments, etc. So you're very welcome to stay. Just to note that we have received some public questions in writing. Chandra Woodley of Leederville in relation to item 5.3, James Penman of Mount Lawley in relation to 6.1. Mari, we had your statements in relation to item 8.4. Anthony Dowling of Leederville in relation to 5.3. And that was all. So thank you very much. We'll close public question time and we will go to declarations of interest. CEO.
Through Mayor Cole, received 1 declaration of interest from Councillor Loden in relation to item 5.6, which is the Trees of Significance Inventory, 59 Ellesmere. The impartiality interest notes that Councillor Loden is a resident of the street and friends with adjoining neighbours. That's all for tonight.
Thank you very much, CEO. Councillors, any last minute declarations of interest?
I've got a standing. I think I have a standing one. So it's the same as last week in terms of the potential for any development or maintenance related to the admin building and or the childcare centre at 244 Vincent Street.
We can include that in the agenda papers for the OCM next week.
Yes, I think if we've got a standing declaration that at least if it's either noted in the papers, it doesn't have to be read out each time, but probably pointed to.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Councillors, any other declarations of interest? Okay, in order to deal with the business that's been raised, first from members of the public gallery, I just wanted to check, because I know quite a few people have just left. Is anyone still here in relation to 8.4? Okay, well, what I might do then is I'll go to the other items that have been raised by members of the public gallery before that, because that item will probably be lengthy given that there are 20 motions from an electors meeting. So the second item that was raised was item 5.1, which is 109 Palmerston Street, Perth, proposed 4 group dwellings. So councillors, questions on this item, please. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to raise the question raised from the gallery around the overshadowing. I think the comment was that 3 of the properties is 70% overshadowing. One of them, of those 3, one was 90%. And how does that fit with the 50% overshadowing under the R codes?
Through you, Mayor Cole, if you can hear me.
Hello, Mr. Naidu, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Yes, Councillor Loden, how does that fit into 50% deemed to comply standard under the R codes? Under the R codes, 50% is a measure for the entirety of that adjoining lot at number 107 Palmerston Street. In terms of the comments made tonight, that was made in respect to each of those strata properties, individual units proportionally for those. So the R codes deemed to comply assessment for 50% considers the overall site area. The comments that you heard tonight are in respect to each of those units areas, but that is correct in terms of the extent of overshadowing for each of those units.
Councillor Loden.
And then just to follow up, I guess the entire site is 62% on the 21st of June. And that departs, I guess, for the benefit of those in the gallery. Why is that justified, the additional 12 point whatever percent overshadowing?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in terms of why it's justified, that justification needs to be grounded in the design principles. You heard that tonight from a presenter, and those design principles refer to consideration of extent of overshadowing of outdoor living areas and protecting north-facing major openings of the adjoining property. When you're seeking a design principles assessment, it's not about the extent that it departs from the deemed to comply standard. The R codes calls on an assessment in terms of its impact. And that impact, again, is around protecting outdoor living areas of the adjoining property as well as those major openings. In the officer's assessment, we've considered a number of things in respect to that. Though it is not from the proposed development itself, there is extensive overshadowing from the existing fig tree. Officers have included a diagram that demonstrates the extent of that overshadowing. It's greater than 60% of the adjoining property.
Manager, I just was looking for that because it is a very lengthy report, and I can't quite get my tabulations to come up in a readable format. Can you just point out that it might be useful for councillors just to have a look at that overshadowing diagram? I think it's attachment 13, but I can't have, if you've got a page number there, that would be very handy.
174.
Thank you very much, Councillor Castle. Sorry, go ahead, Manager.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying for that, Mayor Cole. Yes, that overshadowing diagram was drafted by the city's officers to demonstrate the extent of overshadowing from the fig tree to the subject site, as well as the adjoining property. And we've also overlaid the floor plan of the adjoining property. So it's demarcated in the green. So you can see that there is a substantial amount of overshadowing, but importantly, there would be additional overshadowing from the proposed development, particularly to the front portion of the adjoining property. And that's because of the angle of the sun and the orientation of the lot. So that is a relevant consideration. And though the total amount of overshadowing of the adjoining property standalone is reflected in the presentation made tonight, it doesn't account for the fact that some of that would be within the overshadowed area from the fig tree as well.
So councillors, that's quite a critical point. So page 174 is the overshadowing diagram, which shows the different layering. Any other questions, councillor Loden?
And so maybe just to repeat back what I'm hearing here. So the justification there is that there's existing overshadowing because of the fig tree, and that where that is separating from that, obviously we can look at the diagram, that is overwhelmingly not overshadowing open space. It's more falling on people's roofs and so forth, so that it's not causing an impact.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Largely, yes, that is part of administration's view, in that portion of the overshadowing would fall within the existing overshadowing from the fig tree. There's also the consideration of the existence of that fig tree on the other side of the subject property, which means that the development needs to be shifted or closer to that southern boundary and away from that fig tree because of the root protection area. And that came through as part of the assessment and the arborist report, which accompanied the proposal. So basically, the development needs to protect that significant tree, which is the fig tree in the Robertson Park. That also means that the development is to the southern boundary. And that would be consistent with the subdivision approval for the site, which has already been issued, okay, which shows the lots for development being towards this southern boundary. Finally, from administration's perspective, in terms of the assessment, still undertaking an assessment around access to sunlight throughout the course of the day. So the overshadowing diagram that you'd be referring to is that like a worst case scenario. So that's basically winter solstice, when day is shortest, but throughout the course of the year and throughout the course of the day, the sun would move, allowing access to some of those outdoor living areas in the morning for the front units 1 and 2 on the adjoining property, and units 3 and 4 in the afternoon as well. So that is also a relevant consideration in terms of access to sunlight.
Councillors. Manager, just a couple of questions from me, just in relation to the conditioned San Selmo reclaimed bricks, just seeking confirmation that that's the brick with the lighter appearance.
Yes, correct, Mayor Cole.
Thank you. And also just in relation to the increased primary street setback, but there still seems to be the hard stand. Was there any consideration of, with that increased setback, provision of additional landscape?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the setting back of the development 0.6 metres away from the street does provide additional landscaping area within that front setback area for Unit 1. And there have been, or there has been additional 2 trees planted within that area. But ultimately, by shifting the development back towards that northern side, that also increases the amount of hard stand, because effectively you're creating more driveway area or common property by shifting the entire property back. So that's, I think, the compromise by trying to provide greater relief to the street and setting the development back. You're also going to have to extend the driveway area.
Thank you. And then I did notice on page 20, where there's a bit of the summary, talks about some of the pluses and minuses of the changes that have been made. And it did talk about there being slightly more overshadowing to the rear of the neighbour's outdoor living area. Overall, I just wasn't entirely sure, because I think also the DRP was sort of raised this as well. Overall, do you have a view on whether the former plans were more beneficial or than these latter plans, or do you think that the benefits overall are better in relation to the revised with minor changes that we have before us?
Yes, Mayor Cole, that summary assessment was was provided to demonstrate that. It depends on your test or your measure of appropriateness. So there were a number of concerns raised by council as part of its previous deferral. If one of those considerations was around overshadowing. Now, if that's your ultimate test, then based on the quantitative amount of overshadowing, it would reduce ever so slightly by effectively shifting the development towards the rear by 0.6 meters and shifting the development away from the side lot boundary by 0.2 meters. So that would effectively reduce the extent of overshadowing ever so minor. However, there is the concern around, I guess, where that overshadowing would fall, and you referred to that. By shifting the development back, it would ultimately impact the overshadowing to the rear unit more so because of the angle of the lot. So I think that's the consideration here. There's the quantitative amount of the overshadowing, but then it also comes down to what is that actual impact of that. I guess from administration's perspective, the impact to that outdoor living area to the rear would be greater. But again, that just needs to be balanced with the overshadowing amount in its entirety. So it's a challenging one. I'm not sure that if the changes are significant enough to say that one is better than the other, but there are improvements and some consequences.
Thank you, Manager. And just finally on the overshadowing, given that's quite the critical issue, the overshadowing diagram, which I've found on page 168, anyway, found it eventually. It does show the expanse of the fig tree overshadowing, but I'm just wondering, for the purposes of comparison between the fig tree and the built form overshadowing, is the tree overshadowing quite dense, or is that quite dappled, just in terms of trying to get an idea of whether it might be overshadowing but you're still getting some light penetration through, or is the canopy so dense that it's very similar to built form?
To you, Mayor Cole, I wouldn't be able to answer that with great confidence, so I can confirm that in the briefing notes.
Okay, thank you, Manager. Any other questions, councillors? Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to item 6.1. We still have Harold Street residents here, so we'll go to that item. Harold Street response to petition 6.1. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to ask, in terms of our parking management strategy, how does resident parking fit in that hierarchy? My understanding is we typically start and then progressively work our way down in terms of the duration of restriction. So what is the basis for going from a 2P parking to resident-only parking?
Through you, Mayor Cole. It's a unique area with its unique challenges. What we are suggesting is mirroring the current restrictions on Mary Street, which currently have residential parking on one side and 2P parking on the other. So we're not really setting a precedent. It's just in this little catchment area. And I'm happy to share the survey results, which indicate there is a high usage rate, where consideration should be given for residential only parking.
And maybe a difficult one. Do you know when we introduced the resident only parking on Mary Street?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I believe about 10 years ago, but I'm happy to include in the briefing notes.
And also, what was the last, another difficult one, when was the last time council introduced residential only parking elsewhere in the city?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'd have to look through all council reports, but I'm happy to include that in the briefing notes as well.
And I guess the general thrust of my queries here is why resident only parking versus going to 1P or half P or pay parking with resident parking permits instead?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the Rangers have increased their patrols of the area significantly over the last couple of months. And what we found is it doesn't change users' behaviour in this area from 1P or 2P. So we're hoping that residential only parking has a greater impact, and rangers can enforce it more efficiently.
Councillor Loden, have you got anything else? Councillor Hallett?
Just two questions. Just following on from that, was there any consideration put towards introducing paid parking with a residential permit?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we tried that previously in Mary Street. And when what we found was it just moved the problem on unless you do the whole street. And council may consider that. But it was tried at the Beaufort Street end of Mary Street. We had a couple of ticket machines down there. And it just moved the problem further onto Mary Street. And I think that's one of the rationales why they introduced the residents only parking in the first place.
Thank you. And just the petitioner mentioned a request for a warrant check after the opening of the Chalice development. Is that something that administration would be willing to do?
Through the chair, yes, and engineering team can look at that after development opens. Yep, that's not a problem.
Councillors, Councillor Gonciewski.
Thank you. Just in relation to the wording of the recommendation, been asked to note the current approved Main Roads WA funded Black Spot project. My understanding is that funding has been approved by Main Roads, but there hasn't been any consultation or approval of the design of the road treatment by council. Is that correct?
Through the chair, the application would have been made by administration back in 2019, and through that process there would have been a concept design. I'm just not aware what consultation was done back then, but consultation is planned to happen during the construction phase of the project.
Okay, so it hasn't. So the project is not currently approved, because it sort of says in the item 1 that to note the current approved Main Roads WA funded Black Spot project.
Through the chair, the project's approved to be delivered in the 22-23 financial year as a project.
But the purpose of consultation would be to assess the potential design and consider input, and therefore it might change. So it's an approved project, but the design is not approved. Is that correct?
Through the chair, generally with the safety projects, the consultation would be informed, and so the engineering team would typically letter drop and put information on the website that the project's taking place, as it is an approved project on the capital project for 22-23.
Okay, well, I'm happy to have a chat offline about that and the relationship to our engagement policy, and I'll speak to it if necessary at the meeting next week. I guess I just have a question in relation to the consultation on the proposed black spot treatment and the traffic calming warrant check, which is also noted to have some consultation on it. What's the timing difference in relation to those? How long does it take to do a traffic warrant check? And do we have an estimated timing for the completion of the Chalice apartments?
Through the chair, the traffic warrant check can be done relatively quickly, so in the next couple of weeks. From that, then a design would be, if it's warranted, a design would be completed. And then if there was funds remaining in this year's financial budget and time allowed the project to be completed, it would be something that could be delivered this financial year, but most likely would carry over to the new financial year.
Thank you. And just in relation to other black spot projects, there was some consultation being undertaken on a black spot treatment design proposed for the intersection of Harold and Lord Street. Can I get a status update on that? Will that be considered in, I guess, with all these proposed changes, or is that being progressed in isolation?
And through the chair, the Lord and Harold Street isn't funded by the Black Spot program this year, so it's from Muni funds, and that money is to investigate any potential treatments that we can do at that intersection this financial year.
So what were the results of the consultation that was already undertaken?
Through the chair, I believe there was some concept designs already consulted, and the engineering team's just gone through that consultation piece. However, the funds will be to analyze the treatments. As I said, there's no Black Spot funding for that project this year, so the Muni funds will be spent on the design to determine what treatment is suitable for that intersection moving forward.
Okay, nothing further.
Councillors. I did have a couple of questions. So in relation to the recommendation to council is that we consider the resident only parking on the north side of the street, but the residents have talked about the south side. Can I just get a bit of explanation of, I'm not sure if that's Manager of Ranger Services or yourself, Manager of Engineering, but just seeking the rationale for north side of the street versus south side of the street.
Through you, Mayor Cole, what we thought we'd do without setting a precedent, and then before the precinct parking management plans were reviewed, we would remain consistent in the area. So the opposite side of the school on Mary Street was residential and 2P on the school side. So we just wanted to mirror that to allow people during the day, parents, to attend various functions and they'll be less impacted. And also there's more residential housing on the other side of the street due to the length of the school.
So Manager, does that mean that there'd be more bays that would be resident only on the north than if it was on the south?
I would have to take that on notice. I know there's 41 bays in the street, but I'm unsure of which side of the street.
Yeah, that would be useful, I think, to understand bay numbers on north versus south. That would be very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, just in relation to the recommendation, it does talk about the fact that we're going to consult on the parking, but it doesn't mention that under the consultation section in the report itself. I'm not sure whether that might have potentially been missed. I can take that on notice and have a look if you like. And in relation to the loading and taxi bays, I understand those changes would go ahead immediately if council adopts the as recommended.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that would be correct.
Okay, and just in relation to the Black Spot funding, probably similar to Councillor Gontaszewski, that it talks about inform. I had thought that when we last reviewed our community engagement framework that we'd actually talked about going further with our Black Spot, so that was no longer simply inform. So perhaps if you could just clarify that, that would be helpful. I'm happy for you to take that on notice. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Mayor Cole, I just have one more question.
Yes, go ahead.
This just relates to the loading zone. I guess, so if the intention is to implement the changes without consulting with the businesses, do we have a sense from the businesses around the timing of deliveries in relation to the clearway? Well, sorry if I've missed that in the report, just that given that it is a clearway in the evening, are businesses aware, like will big businesses be given time to potentially change delivery schedules, etc.?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that would be correct. We give notice to the Beaufort and the other businesses potentially impacted. But just to reiterate, we're just mirroring the same restriction that's outside the Queens at the moment.
Different time of day though, I guess. That's probably has to do with the peak buses. Okay, any further questions on this one? Okay, thank you very much, managers. Appreciate that. We'll go now to item 8.4, responses to motions carried at the annual general meeting of electors held on the 2nd of February 2023. Just before taking questions, I just thought I'd say that because we do have 20 motions to deal with at the council meeting next week, I did discuss with the CEO in order to deal with that, if there are going to be amendments, it'd be really appreciated if they could be tabled by Thursday evening, Friday morning, so that way administration can work with councillors to get those ready and prepared, and it will allow us to be able to move forward through that item a lot more effectively and efficiently on the night. So if you do have items that you wish to move amendments, and you could send those in by email Thursday evening, Friday morning, that would be gratefully appreciated. Questions tonight, and if other questions come up during the week, again, please feel free to use the email so that we can again try to get as much questions out of the way before debating those items on next Tuesday evening. So questions, councillors? Oh, right. Yes, the CEO has just prompted me to ask if members of the public gallery are waiting on any specific items, because at some point we do have a confidential item to consider and we don't want to send you out until you're ready to go. 5.3, yes, that will be next. 5.2, nothing. Okay, 5.3 and 5.2. So after this item, we will go to 5.3 and 5.2. Thank you. Okay, questions, councillor. Councillor Hallett.
Through to CEO, through you, Mayor Cole. Motion 4.21, development green space. Just checking if it's correct that the recommendation is not supported, or is it actually at least partially supported, given the intent matches our practice?
Yeah, that's a good point through you, Mayor Cole. I'll have a look at that and we'll see if that wording reflects our intent. Our intent is obviously to support the intent of what was proposed there. I think the fact is we already have a policy in place that does that. So it's a matter of now reviewing it. So I think that there are parts of it that we support for sure.
Thank you. In the minutes, it refers to 4.9 being taken as a comment, while 4.10 would be considered a question and receive a response in writing. Can I seek clarification if that's an error, and 4.9 should also receive a response? That can be on notice. It's the one relation into the two that were merged about the voice. Has the city ever applied for heritage funding for Hyde Park?
Through Mayor Cole, we might take that on notice, because I'm assuming we would have worked with Heritage Council on the original, on the current, now slightly dated Conservation Heritage Management Plan.
Thank you. And this can also be on notice, but can admin comment on whether or not the I guess the extent of using that conservation plan in relation to works? Yeah.
Through Mayor Cole, and I can just confirm that we do refer and we still use that heritage management plan. Obviously, it's a long-standing park. It's old, just because a document might have been prepared several years ago. There's still a lot of valuable information. So that is our guiding document now, and it would be until a new one replaced it.
Thank you. And does administration have a minimum amount of time that they would estimate before the Bunnings would be built and operational?
Through you, Mayor Cole, there's no building permit has been lodged. So at this point, it's very hard for us to give an estimate. I mean, if it was lodged, it would take over 12 months for it to be constructed. So at this point, we're talking about years before it would be built and operational.
Thank you.
Sorry, as an absolute minimum, if it happens at all.
That's all.
Councillors, questions? Councillor Gontaszewski.
I just have one on 5.1. So just in relation to the request for signage or renaming, And part of the justification around not supporting renaming is also pointed to the third-party advertising prohibition in the city. And I guess I just wanted to find out, as I'm not super familiar with the site, is there a external facing notice board or anything like that on site that might alert users of Braithwaite Park to the regular hires of the facility?
Through Mayor Cole, the lesser hall faces out onto the park. I think Councillor Loden knows it better than I do. There is a notice board in the main entrance as you walk in on the left where there are community notices. I don't think there's a notice board at the start of the lesser hall. So, but you often walk past the main entrance to the upper hall and past that notice board. We have no problems at all with.
Sorry,
people-
CEO. Councillors know that patch very well. You
Okay.
don't even go in the same entrance. Lesser Hall faces out to the park, so you're
Yes,
not
but you
actually.
do walk past on the left. I thought that the.
No, well, you're not
No.
normally, you'd park across the park. This is
You
what the
park on the other
locals
side and
do.
walk across.
They-
Okay.
The locals park or they walk and they just walk across the park. So you're not necessarily walking past a notice board. They're
Mhm.
quite separate and distinct entrances.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Correct.
thank you, Sia, and thank you for that clarification, Mayor Colt. I guess if one was supportive of the perhaps intent behind the motion, which was to assist in alerting park users to the regular hirers of the hall, would the city see that as being of some benefit in terms of a notice board, which might be considered to be very different to third-party advertising or renaming an entire building?
Through Mayor Cole, we'll just check the frontage of the doors facing Braithwaite Park for the lesser hall to see whether or not that could be something we could put in there to flag who might be coming in at which times and essentially duplicate the notice board that's in the main one for that side. So it's a good suggestion. Just need to check there's enough space on the wall to hang the notice board, which Councillor Loden might know off the top of his head.
Possibly between the glass doors and the toilets. Yeah, but not on the glass because it's the refurb has glass, very open glass frontage, but there is wall between that and the toilets.
Just one for consideration, perhaps. And then just on e-waste, I know that the city has a number of recycling or drop-off stations that are in situ at places like supermarkets and Beatty Park. And I'm just wondering what those stations currently accept and what and perhaps why then an e-waste or a small e-waste collection point would be not appropriate in those to be included in those recycling stations.
Through you, Mayor Cole. At the moment, we've got 5 recycling stations. It's Mares, Woolworths and various shopping centres. They currently have batteries, fluorescent tubes and mobile phones, so it's quite small items. The problem with e-waste is that it does tend to be quite bulkier items. When we've had, there've been other councils, the bins tend to get broken into. There's a lot of antisocial behaviour, people trying to get things out of there, set on fire, and it's finding a suitable location as well. So I just don't, we did look at it, and the nearest, I accept that Tamala Park is quite a distance, but Balcatta is only 8.3 kilometres, so it's 15 minutes from here. If that is an option. There's also options put in the notice of motion for take back at Officeworks, so they will take all your bigger items as well. So I think there's fair few options out there already, in addition to the Verge side, Verge Valley. So I think there's a fair few options that people can access.
Can I just piggyback off that response, because there seems to be when Mr. Meyer was speaking tonight, he talked about $200 fee for Verge Valet, but my understanding is that e-waste is accepted items. So if you are calling up to do your free Verge Valet, you can have your bulky goods taken, and then you can also have your e-waste as part of that. So there's at least one free, is that correct? At least one free e-waste pickup from your Verge per year. Yes. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Councillor Loden.
So then is the $100, I thought Mr. Meyer said 100, is that if you then had to do a second collection? Yeah.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, that's correct. If you want to do a Virgin Valley Extra.
That was my first question. Sorry. There was a motion around the timing of Australia Day, and at the time they talked about the need for it to be before the 26th of January because of anxiety for people that are anxious to become citizens and so forth. In our response, we sort of referred to say that we can do it either 3 days before or 3 days after. Is there any reason why we couldn't say that we will always do it in the 3 days before Australia Day?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, so we were this time round, we were considering that. First of all, it's not our only citizenship ceremony of the year. We hold them every few months, depending on numbers. So it's not the one and only chance of the year to do that. So I wasn't sure if the submitter was aware of that. In considering the timing of scheduling of this citizenship ceremony this year, I think there could be an argument for or against, particularly around the sensitivity of Australia Day for Aboriginal members of the community, whether or not the citizenship ceremony should be before or after. We decided that it should be on the Friday after. Our view is that I don't think you could argue that argument can be made both ways, as long as it wasn't on Australia Day.
Thank you. And then my other query was the decision making around the timing was down to administration interpreting a view expressed by council. What would prevent administration from doing it on the 26th of January next year? Or is it because it's not a policy position or a procedure or anything like that? Appreciate that this administration has taken on board the views of council, but if that changed, what would happen there in that context? Or do we have anywhere where that sort of is documented?
Through you, Mayor Cole, a civic ceremony is presided over by the mayor, so the timing of the citizenship ceremonies does require liaison with the mayor on the mayor's availability, and then also some logistical exercises around the venue and the numbers of people attending and what time of day and the like. And Mayor Cole's just pointed out, we also invite federal members of parliament and state members of parliament. I think it'd be inconceivable for anyone in administration not to understand council's view on that issue. So I couldn't imagine a scenario where anyone would be proposing Australia Day as the suitable time going forward.
Thank you. Changing tack to Menzies Street traffic. I was just curious to know if we have any, so the motion talked about vehicle movements, the amount of movements, and I was just wondering if we knew how many vehicles per day that street was experiencing, and if you had a general sense of the direction. Is it people traveling east or west where that's causing the challenge?
Through the chair, we do have some traffic data that we can review. I just don't have that in front of me at the moment. But yeah, we can definitely review the traffic data, and if warranted, put more traffic counters and analyze up-to-date data in that respect.
And I guess if we were interested in exploring the idea of creating a cul-de-sac, would its proximity to Ango Street as an activation opportunity be a good opportunity for the city to consider?
Through the chair, we need to do more traffic modelling if we are going to cul-de-sac and stop through flow traffic. And again, main roads would need to be consulted as they would ultimately approve any cul-de-sacs that we would construct.
I guess so. We looked at basically going the other side of Fitzgerald Street, where we're looking at the Safe Active Street. We've kind of considered this number of around about above 1,000 vehicle movements a day. Is whilst these streets are rated for 3,000, if you're getting anywhere up towards 1,500 a day, that's getting to be quite a significant burden on that street, and would potentially suggest
a question,
intervention.
Councillor Logan?
Yep. Yes, I'm getting to it. So if I'm trying to preempt a amendment to give administration time to consider. So if there was high vehicle flow, we were up around 1,500, what would be the appropriate amendment to put in there to get an intervention assessed there?
Through the chair, I suppose we would holistically need to look at traffic volumes, crash histories, and other big one, speeds. There's a whole suite of steps, and through the warrant check that we do, we can certainly look into that and see what that looks like. Probably don't have the words to an amendment right at this moment in time, but we can definitely look at something to put through. Yeah.
So I guess I would flag that if it is demonstrated as significant traffic volumes or like up around that 1,500, I would like to put forward an amendment around that to get some assessment of greater intervention there to reduce traffic volumes on that street. Then continuing on to Strathcona Street, the same question around volume as well there. Do we have any data at this point for Strathcona?
Yeah, through the chair, yes, we do have volumes for Strathcona, and off the top of my head, we're quite low. It has been created a safe active street over the last maybe 18 months or so, and that's reduced the speeds to 30. So just looking at the warrant for that area, I wouldn't believe it would meet the criteria to do any further traffic calming, as it is a safe active streets at the moment. Yeah.
And is it possible to get the vehicle movement data in the briefing notes as well?
Through the chair, yes, we can add them in.
And then similarly, if you were to turn this into a cul-de-sac and create a public open space, would that help to address the deficit of public open space in that area as well?
Through the chair, again, from an engineering perspective, we would need to step through the warrant scores and checks and balances, but yeah, I don't believe warrants any further traffic control, but certainly public open space, yes, indeed it would add to that if it was to be constructed.
Councillor Castle. Thank you, Mayor. I have a question on motion 4.1 in relation to Lesser Hall. In the report, it mentions that the soon to be established outdoor stage in Braithwaite Park would expose the presence of the proposed RSL Hall. The logo and the flagpole would complement the outdoor stage. Could we have some information about this proposed outdoor stage? I'm happy for that to be in the briefing notes for whoever has that info.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I understand that's an initiative from the town team, which they're pursuing.
Yes, that was my understanding as well, but I'd not heard that it had progressed at all beyond an idea.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is not on the city's list of things to do at the moment, but we do understand it's been proposed by the local town team.
Thanks. Perhaps the that part of the report can be reviewed, because it certainly reads as if it's definitely happening. Councillors, questions? Okay, I have a few questions. I was just wondering if we could potentially at the front of the report have a list of the motions, sort of like an index. With the recommendation. That would be helpful in navigating it. In relation to motion 4.1, I wondered whether the city had considered talking about our principles of co-location and community hubs as part of the response to the motion. And also interested in Councillor Gontaszewski's idea of a community notice board stating the regular hires that would potentially help them with having the community use their services. In relation to motion 4.2, all the information is there. It's just quite dense. Sorry if that's don't mean that to be disrespectful. I just, from the perspective of a lay person reading this, it doesn't clearly sort of state that we have already got the 15% deep soil zone and the tree canopy. It's there if you look for it, but I just thought that could potentially be brought forward as part of the response. And again, that question of whether it's actually not supported or partially supported, I think that's a good question that has been asked. In relation to motion 4.4 on the Britannia Reserve pathway, I did just want to inquire as to whether administration has considered the fact that cyclists are currently using the footpath to access the freeway principal shared path, and whether consideration should be given to widening at least one part of that footpath. So because the motions about conflict between pedestrian and cyclists, is it something that the administration needs to consider to go to the heart of this issue of conflict between pedestrians and cyclists, potentially there? In relation to motion 4.7 and 4.15, the recommendation is not supported, but then the reason does talk about the fact that it's due to be considered by council at a pretty imminent council meeting. So just wondered whether council administration thought that just simply saying not supported doesn't go to that issue of the fact that it is due for consideration imminently by council.
Do you, Mayor Cole, agree? I think that probably relates to a couple of our responses. So it might be more accurate to say not supported at this time or not supported at this stage.
Yeah, I think that there shouldn't feel constraint to say supported or not supported. Or I think that where there's a ground
Pending,
that,
pending future consideration of
I think
council or
that
something.
I would appreciate that those sorts of things are incorporated into the recommendation. It's a bit more it's a bit blunt to say not supported when council's about to consider something very similar at an imminent council meeting. In relation to motion 4.8 and chemical sprays, council has sought quite a lot of information quite regularly on this. And I just wanted to follow up on the comment that complete elimination of the use of glyphosate ... is not supported due to the need to use chemicals for certain weed control requirements, e.g. eco-zoning program implementation and maintenance. Can I just get some clarification on maintenance, given that that is quite a broad concept, and that previously we have been informed that glyphosate use is continually being reduced. So if we could just have a bit more information about where glyphosate is being used for maintenance across the eco-zoning part.
Through Mayor Cole, we'll add that into the briefing notes. Understand maintenance refers specifically to the curbs and footpaths where this can be particularly difficult, and that's where we do apply glyphosate.
Could I ask just a question on that one? Sure. The lady that put that motion forward was talking particularly about boobook owls and the effect in using that poison for rats, and that those owls would pick it up.
That was rodenticides, which the city's recommendation is to support. That's a separate motion.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Just an observation, though, that was being used at Britannia recently on the perimeter. So I'm still seeking guidance from administration on where it's used and where it isn't used. In relation to motion 4.12, Ms. Ashley LaFontaine asked 2 questions. Hopefully they've been captured. Just looking at other questions that were asked from public gallery this evening. I think that John Visca asked a couple of questions. Hopefully they've been captured in relation to the Hyde Park conservation. I think the rest were comments. In relation to motion 4.13, the creation of the cul-de-sac, could some further information please be incorporated talking to the DOT traffic study? And could consideration be given to if administration's rationale is that the projected traffic movements in the area do not warrant further investigation, would administration look at this in relation to the DOT study and or after the opening of the Bunnings once the impacts can be measured in real time?
To you, Mayor Cole, I can talk to 4.12 now if you like, in relation to the rates that were collected. If you'd like an answer now.
I'm happy for those ones to be taken on notice. Yep, thanks. And if we could just get clarity in relation to motion 4.16, that whilst it does seem to suggest that if it could just be absolutely crystal clear that Verge Valet, the free service once a year for residents, does include the ability to collect e-waste. And that was all from me. Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Wallace.
Sorry, I sniped you there. I just had a really quick one on number 4.8, the chemical sprays. I was wondering if we've ever done any assessment of residual glyphosate concentrations in soils where we do apply it. I guess there's occupational health concerns around its application, but any, I guess, like ongoing risks to human or environmental health would be done on the basis of glyphosate stored in the soil. So I understand there's a question on notice about areas where we do apply it. I'd be very interested in knowing, or if we could, take a few samples, send them to one of the environmental labs like ALS or MPL, who would do that test pretty cheaply, and just determine whether it's being applied at the correct rate and whether there are any ongoing risks related to its use. Thanks.
I think that's a briefing notes response.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Hallett.
Sorry. Sorry, and just to go back to 4.3 citizenship ceremonies, I think if administration's response is supported and that's about enacting the motion, I feel like the response is a little bit, we kind of agree with it and the vibe is there, but that doesn't necessarily enact, that does not hold them in future. If it was to be in policy somewhere, where would it go?
Through Mayor Cole, if I could take that on notice just in terms of the guidelines we have around civic ceremonies and citizenship ceremonies, we could clarify that. We've got different things. I'll see where it's best placed and can include that in the briefing notes.
Councillors, Councillor Warner, Councillor Uplow, Councillor Alexander, do you have any questions on the electors' motions? Okay, thank you. All right, then we'll move on to item 5.3, which is number 209 Oxford Street, Leederville, proposed change of use from eating house to restaurant cafe and unlisted use shisha bar and associated alterations and additions. This is existing unauthorised development. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. There was a bunch of questions from a neighbour which were in email. I just wanted to ask one of them, which was around if admin can explain how once identified the unauthorised development use is allowed to continue to operate.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the city doesn't have the power to stop an owner from carrying out a development. We only have the power to commence a prosecution, and then the court would make a decision about what action they take, fines or any other enforcement that they can carry out. So as mentioned in the report, the city has commenced prosecution proceedings against the operator, and that's the extent of our powers. And the operator's decided to continue operating despite all of those things.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I had a similar question and I just wondered if I could get some clarification on the compliance process because it has been quite drawn out. There was some discussion at the last council meeting about new processes that we have in place to flag these developments when they have been approved, but then later, to check on compliance. And I'm just wondering, do those processes, would they help in a situation like this where we've had an initial contact in July 2020 to say development approval was required, but then no further action by the city until November 2021?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. My understanding is that in relation specifically to this case, we found out about the unauthorised development, noting that they had an approval as a restaurant. We advised them that they needed to stop operating. And we didn't have any complainants at that stage. So I don't think we followed up to check. I think we left it at that. We told them they needed to operate as a restaurant only, and we took it on good faith that they were doing that and prioritised the matters that we had that had a complainant that was concerned about an amenity impact. So we prioritised based on impact, and that was the reason why we didn't follow up until we received a complaint. We followed up straight away because we had issued the direction earlier. We were in a good position to then carry out enforcement and the prosecution as well.
Okay, so then in May 2022, we received the development application. I'm just trying to understand what was happening between May and November when we commenced prosecution proceedings. Was that time used to assess the application?
A number of things were happening during that period through the Mayor. The first thing was our approach historically has been to allow developments to operate if they have lodged a development application or have shown and demonstrated that they were working towards that. So they're putting their acoustic report together and all the other studies that they need to do. So when that occurs, historically, we've allowed that to happen. We've recently, that became an issue at one point when we had an operator that was clearly causing an issue, even though they'd lodged their development application. And as a result, we, at the time of working on the compliance and enforcement policy, council then endorsed a policy which said, in these circumstances where there's an amenity impact, we'll require developers to stop operating. And so that happened in the middle of this. And as a result, we instructed them to then stop operating. So there was a period there where we allowed them to keep going while their application was being put together and considered.
Okay, so apologies if I've missed it in the report. Are they currently operating the unauthorised use?
Yes.
And there was a request through their lawyer in November 2022 to withdraw the application, which there's no mechanism to do. Does that indicate that they're intending? I'm just trying to understand what you think the applicant's intentions are.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, their advice at that time was that from their lawyer was that I'm not sure if it was from their lawyer, but their advice anyway at that time was that they didn't need a development approval. They believed that restaurant covered the shisha component of their development. We disagree with that after taking legal advice, and so we consider that a development application is needed.
Thank you, Councillor Castle. I was also interested in the fact of the intentions, given that applicant's representative had sought to withdraw the application. They're still wishing for us to go ahead.
Well, my understanding is their request to withdraw still stands, but they've lodged the application. It can't be withdrawn, must be determined.
Okay. And they're still carrying out the unauthorised activity?
That's my understanding, yes. So the last inspection they were. Whether that's changed in the recent weeks, I'm not sure, but that's my understanding. Yeah.
All right. Councillors, Councillor Hallett.
Sorry if I missed it. Is there a timeline for the prosecution to come to a resolution?
I guess I can't I can't just, provide any advice on what the court's going to do. I'd say that it would most of these cases go through the courts in 6 months or so. So it's likely that it'll be determined before the end of the year.
Director, there's a series of questions that were asked by a community member and received on notice, and they are very good questions. They sort of go to issues like, the unauthorised use and why is it continuing? Will council provide reasons if it is approved? Yes, reasons for decision will be provided. That it does hold a retail tobacco licence currently, and talks about the tobacco compliance branch, talks about the enclosed public place in the questions as well. They're all documented and have been submitted around to all council members, but thank you, Wendy. And it does talk about the 50% enclosure, talks about having a barrier fencing, does talk about additional car bays, given that there is 50 people proposed in a 3 by 3.5 metre space. Does that meet, apart from the public health issues of smoking, does that meet public health in terms of numbers and size of venue?
I might let the manager answer some of those questions, but I think the short answer to that question is yes.
Okay.
It does, because it's the entire establishment that's
Oh, sorry, it's
proposing
50
for that
overall,
number.
not just for this part of
Yep,
the use.
that's right.
Okay,
Yep.
that makes sense. Thank you. Manager, if you like, there's those questions from Mr. Anthony Dowling can be put in the briefing notes if you like, unless you wish to answer them now.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, happy to provide the responses in the briefing notes. Majority of those are covered off in the officer report, and we can pull those out. Happy to respond to any particular questions as well from councillors.
Okay, thank you.
After that. Thanks.
Any other questions on this application? No, thank you. Okay, one more item and then we will have to pause and consider our confidential, not consider, but have a briefing on the confidential item. So item 5.2, 103 to 105 Summers Street, Perth, and number 34 Cheriton Street, Perth. Proposed change of use to childcare premises, amendment to approve to incorporate a change of use from single house to childcare premises, including alterations and additions. That's quite a mouthful. Any questions on this item? No questions? I had one simple question. Do the two premises connect through the divide, through the what would be a boundary fence? Michael's saying yes. Thank you, Michael. They do connect. Okay. All right. That was really all from me. Youth plan. You sure? Okay. Any other questions on this item? One question. All right, thank you. The CEO has requested that we go to the youth plan item next, given that we have a staff member here on that. Karen, thank you, manager. Coordinator. Karen Baum, welcome to the meeting, and that is item 7.5, outcome of advertising youth action plan 23 to 26. Any questions? Well, at least you didn't have to wait until the until we dealt with the confidential item. That's all. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. All right. So we will now just need to go to confidential so that we can have a question and answer session in relation to item 11.1. And while we're there, we might as well do 11.2.